300 strikes. She counted every single one as she begged for her life. But what her husband didn't know was that someone was watching from the shadows. Someone who had traveled hundreds of miles to find her. And what happened next changed everything forever. This is the true story of a woman who survived hell, and the man who brought justice when no one else would. The leather of the whip whistled through the air before slamming against the wall. Chloe closed her eyes, knowing that the next time, it wouldn't miss. On the ranch. The Willow Creek Ranch, 25 miles from Fort Worth, Texas, the silence was more dangerous than the screams. The arid land stretched as far as the eye could see, and the 2-story adobe house stood like a forgotten castle among the dry brush. It was the kind of place where nobody heard anything, where the closest neighbors lived a half-hour drive away, and where a woman could disappear without anyone asking questions. Chloe Miller was 24 and had been married for 18 months to Randall Blake, a 38-year-old man who inherited the ranch from his father and turned it into his own kingdom of terror. She met him in Dallas during the August State Fair. He arrived wearing a cowboy hat, exotic leather boots, and a smile that promised protection. What he didn't promise was the cage. "Where were you?" Randall's voice thundered from the hallway. Chloe put the pot down on the stove and wiped her hands on her apron. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel her pulse in her temples. "Making dinner, Randall, as always." He walked into the kitchen with heavy steps. He smelled of whiskey and dirt. His small, dark eyes scanned her from head to toe with contempt. "And this morning, I saw you talking to Jesse in the barn. He asked me to bring him water. It was hot." The blow came without warning. He hit her so hard that Chloe lost her balance and fell to her knees. A metallic taste flooded her mouth. "Don't talk to the hands. Don't talk to anyone. Got it?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the red floor tiles. The tears no longer came. Months ago, she had learned that crying only prolonged the punishment. Randall left the kitchen, slamming the door. The sound of his boots faded toward the second floor, where he kept his office and his collection of rifles. Chloe slowly stood up, touching her swollen cheek. Through the window, she saw Rose, the 60-year-old cook who had worked on the ranch since before Chloe arrived. Rose looked away and continued hanging the laundry, as if nothing had happened. No one helped. No one asked. At Willow Creek, fear was the only law. That night, while Randall snored drunk in the master bedroom, Chloe sat on the kitchen floor with a lit candle and a crumpled piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she wrote in small, desperate handwriting. "Dad, if you ever read this, forgive me for disobeying you. You were right. This man is killing me slowly. I don't know if I'll get out of here alive, but I need you to know that I never stopped being your daughter. I love you. Chloe." She folded the letter into quarters and hid it inside an empty coffee can at the back of the pantry. She had no way to send it. She had no phone, no car. She had nothing. But at least she had left a record. If something happened to her, someone would find those words. What Chloe didn't know was that 200 miles away, in Houston, a 62-year-old man with a face weathered by the sun and war had already made a decision. Retired Colonel Stephen Miller closed the file on his desk. Inside were photos of the Willow Creek Ranch, neighbor reports, statements from fired workers. His daughter had been out of contact for 5 months. The last 2 calls she made were abruptly cut off. Messages went unanswered. Stephen poured a tequila into a short glass and drank it in one gulp. He had served 30 years in the U.S. Army. He had seen drug cartels, hunted criminals, survived ambushes. But nothing prepared him for the helplessness of knowing that his own daughter was suffering, and he couldn't do anything. Yet. "Martha," he called to his wife, "I'm bringing Chloe back." His wife walked into the office, her eyes red from crying. "How, Stephen? That man is dangerous. He has weapons. He has people. If you show up with the police, he could hurt her before they arrive. I'm not showing up with the police, he replied, opening a drawer where he kept fake documents, old clothes, and an agricultural worker ID. I'm going to arrive like a ghost. 2 days later, a stooped man, wearing shabby clothes, a frayed straw hat, and a fake scar on his cheek, knocked on the back door of the Willow Creek Ranch. Rose opened it suspiciously. "What do you want?" "I'm looking for work, ma'am. Whatever you have. Cleaning stables, fixing fences. I don't eat much, and I can sleep anywhere." Rose looked him up and down. The man seemed harmless, too old to cause trouble. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, Randall came out to the back entrance with a beer in his hand. He studied the stranger with disdain. "Do you know how to work hard?" "My whole life, boss." "I'll pay you $50 a day. You sleep in the tool shed. You don't come into the house. You don't talk to my wife. Understood?" "Perfectly clear, boss." Randall turned his back and went back inside. The man in the straw hat walked toward the barn with slow steps, but his eyes observed everything. The barred windows, the padlocked doors, the dirt road that led to the exit. Colonel Stephen Miller had just entered enemy territory, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the exact moment to act. The colonel had been cleaning stables for 4 days when he finally saw her. Chloe came out to the backyard with a basket of wet laundry. She was wearing a simple mustard-colored dress, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. From a distance, Stephen noticed something that squeezed his chest. His daughter was limping slightly on her left foot, and as she hung a sheet on the clothesline, her arm movement was clumsy, as if it hurt to lift the weight. He squeezed the rake in his hands until his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath. He couldn't approach her. Not yet. One false move, and Randall would suspect. He had to be patient, like on the military missions, where a second of impatience cost lives. Chloe hung the last item and stood motionless, looking toward the hills, as if searching for something that no longer existed. Freedom, perhaps. Hope. Then, as if remembering that she had no permission to dream, she lowered her head and returned to the house with small, measured steps. Stephen forced himself to keep raking the dry hay. But inside, the soldier in him was already drawing maps, calculating distances, studying routines. At night, he slept in the tool shed, a cramped space that smelled of motor oil and damp earth. There, by the light of a small flashlight, he wrote down everything he observed in a notebook. Day 4. Randall drinks starting at 5 in the afternoon. By 9, he's unconscious. 2 guard dogs, but they only bark at strangers the first week. Jesse, the head hand, is afraid of losing his job. Rose, the cook, knows what's happening, but she doesn't speak. Chloe never goes out alone. The windows in her room have bars on the inside. On the 5th day, Randall gathered all the workers in the main courtyard. There were 6 in total. Jesse, the oldest hand, 2 young laborers named Mike and Darren, Rose, the cook, Mr. Reyes, the horse caretaker, and the new one, whom everyone called just Mr. August, because that was the false name the colonel chose. "Listen closely," Randall said, with his arms crossed and a pistol tucked into his waist. "There are rules on this ranch. The most important one: no one gets involved in my business. No one talks about what they see. No one asks questions. No one gives opinions. Anyone who disagrees leaves today without a cent." Everyone looked down. Randall walked past them like a general inspecting defeated troops. "Oh, and one more thing. If anyone talks to my wife without my permission, I'll kick them out. Is that clear?" A murmur of approval. Randall spat on the ground and returned to the house, slamming the door. Jesse approached the colonel as they walked toward the barn. "Don't mind him, Mr. August. He's always like this, just yelling and threats." "And the missus?" Stephen asked in a raspy voice, feigning indifference. Jesse looked toward the house and then lowered his voice. Better not to ask. The walls have ears here. But that very afternoon, while Stephen was repairing a broken fence near the kitchen, he heard something that chilled his soul. A muffled scream, a dry thud, the unmistakable sound of something breaking. He carefully peeked through the slightly open window and saw Chloe on the kitchen floor, picking up pieces of a broken plate. Randall was standing next to her, with his belt in his hand. "I told you dinner should be ready by 7. It's 7:15. "I'm sorry, Randall. The rice burned, and I had to make it again." The belt whistled in the air and hit the table, inches from Chloe's head. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just closed her eyes and waited. Stephen had to bite his lip until he felt pain to keep from jumping through that window. His hands were trembling. The fake scar on his cheek peeled off a little from the sweat. Randall put the belt away and left the kitchen, laughing. "Learn to be faster. Useless." Chloe stayed there, on her knees, picking up the ceramic pieces with trembling hands. Rose came in a moment later and helped her in silence. Neither one said anything. It was a ritual they both knew too well. That night, after making sure everyone was asleep, Stephen left the tool shed and walked through the shadows to the back of the house. There was an old, half-collapsed wooden shed that no one used, full of rusted tools and bags of dry feed. From there, he had a perfect view of the inner courtyard, where Chloe hung the laundry every morning. He checked between the boards until he found what he was looking for. A crack in the wall, at eye level, disguised by a pile of empty boxes. It was the perfect hiding spot. He could see without being seen. He could hear everything. He returned to the tool shed when the clock struck 2 in the morning. He took a small video camera the size of a lighter out of his backpack. Military technology had taught him that words are forgotten, but images do not forgive. Tomorrow, he would install it in the shed, and when the time came, the whole world would know who Randall Blake really was. On the 6th day, while Stephen pretended to repair a cartwheel in the abandoned shed, he hid the camera between 2 wooden beams, pointing exactly toward the inner courtyard. He tested the angle 3 times. Perfect. At noon, Rose brought him a plate of beans and tortillas. "Eat, Mr. August. It's very hot." He thanked her with a gesture. Rose hesitated before leaving. "You seem like a good man," she said softly, looking around. "I don't know what you're doing here, but be careful. The boss, he's not normal. I've seen things I can't forget." Stephen looked her in the eyes. "What about Mrs. Chloe?" Rose clenched her fists. Tears shimmered in her tired eyes. "She doesn't deserve this. No woman deserves it. But here, nothing can be done here. If you talk, he'll kill us. Or worse, he'll make us suffer first." "There's always a way out," Stephen said. Rose looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear, then ran back to the kitchen. That afternoon, Randall drove to town in his truck. Stephen took the opportunity to do a complete reconnaissance of the property. He counted 3 exits, located where the weapons were kept, locked in the office on the 2nd floor. He measured the distance from the house to the main gate, 250 yards. When Randall returned at dusk, he brought more bottles of whiskey and an even worse mood. "Chloe!" he shouted from the entrance. She appeared immediately, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes?" "Make meat. I want dinner in half an hour." "Yes, Randall." But half an hour was not enough. The fire was low, and the meat took 40 minutes. When Chloe served the plate on the table, Randall was already on his 3rd glass of whiskey. "It's cold," he said, tasting a bite. "I'm sorry, He threw the plate to the floor with such force that the ceramic shattered into 1,000 pieces. Chloe backed away, but not fast enough. Randall grabbed her by the hair and pushed her against the wall. "You can't even cook. Why do I keep you?" From the shed, Stephen watched everything through the camera lens. The red recording light was blinking. Every second of violence was being recorded. Randall finally let her go and stumbled up the stairs. Chloe stayed on the floor, breathing heavily, picking up the pieces of food and ceramic with hands that no longer trembled. She was used to it. That night, Stephen couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor of the tool shed with the notebook in his hands. He wrote in firm handwriting, "I can't take this anymore, but if I act now, he could kill her before I get to her. I need a perfect plan. I need proof that will sink him forever. It's not enough to get her out of here. I have to destroy him completely." He closed the notebook and looked out the small window toward the main house. The lights were off, except for one on the second floor, Randall's office, where he was surely drinking himself into oblivion like every night. In the distance, a dog howled. The desert wind rattled the walls of the tool shed. And somewhere in that damned house, Chloe was sleeping, unaware that her father was a few feet away, planning the coldest and most calculated revenge of his life. But what neither of them knew was that the next day, Randall would find something that would make him lose all control, and then hell would truly open up. The coffee can fell to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed throughout the kitchen. Randall picked it up, opened the lid, and pulled out the folded paper. His eyes scanned every word, once, twice. Then he crumpled the letter so hard that his knuckles cracked. "Chloe!" The scream pierced the walls of the ranch like a gunshot. In the abandoned shed, the colonel dropped the tool he was pretending to fix and ran toward his hiding spot between the wooden beams. From there, through the crack in the wall, he had a direct view of the inner courtyard. He turned on the camera. The red light began to blink. Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway, pale as a ghost. "What's wrong?" Randall showed her the crumpled letter in his fist. "What is this?" She felt the floor opening up beneath her. There was no escape, no lie that would work. I was just going to write to your dad." Randall advanced toward her with furious steps. "After everything I did for you, I took you out of that bitter military house. I brought you to my ranch. I gave you my last name. And this is how you repay me? It's not what you think, Randall. Please." He grabbed her arm violently and dragged her out of the house, toward the backyard, where there was a thick wooden post used for tying horses. Chloe tried to resist, but he was much stronger. He pushed her against the post and took a rope from the barn. "Randall, no! Please!" He didn't listen. He tied her hands to the post with knots so tight that the ropes dug into her skin. Then he went into the tool shed and came out with a long braided leather whip, the kind he used for herding cattle. He cracked it in the air twice, testing the weight. Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway, saw the scene, and covered her mouth with her hands. Jesse and the other hands heard the screams from the stables, but none dared to move. Everyone knew that look in Randall's eyes. It was the look of a man who had crossed the line. From his hiding spot in the shed, Colonel Stephen Miller watched everything through the camera. His right hand instinctively moved toward his waist, where a .45 caliber pistol was concealed under his threadbare shirt. His fingers brushed the cold metal. Every fiber of his body screamed at him to go out, to stop this, to empty the gun into that monster. But his military mind stopped him. "If I shoot now, they'll lock me up for murder. And Chloe will be alone again, without justice, without proof. Hold on, record everything, let the world see." He clenched his teeth so hard he felt pain in his jaw. His hands trembled as he held the camera, but he kept the focus steady. 300! Randall shouted, completely drunk, his eyes bloodshot. 300 strikes, so you learn not to betray me. And you're going to count every one. Everyone. Randall, please, I beg you. The first strike sliced through the air with a dry crack that echoed throughout the courtyard. Chloe screamed. "Say one," Randall ordered. "One," she whispered through tears. The second strike was harder. Louder! 2! The colonel closed his eyes for a second, but opened them immediately. He couldn't allow himself to look away. He had to see, he had to record, he had to endure so that this would serve as irrefutable proof. The blows continued. 5, 10, 20. Chloe's voice began to break with every number she pronounced. Her cotton dress started to tear with the impacts of the leather. 23! 24! 25! Randall sweated and cursed, but he didn't stop. Sometimes he missed the blow because he was so drunk, and the whip hit the wooden post, sending splinters flying. But then he adjusted his aim and continued with more rage. 50 strikes. Chloe began to lose her voice. Her screams turned into hoarse moans. "Keep counting or I'll start over," Randall threatened. 51, 52. In the shed, tears ran down the colonel's weathered face, silent tears of a father who watched a piece of his soul die with every blow. But the cold, calculating part of the soldier kept recording, kept focusing, kept memorizing every detail for the day of the trial. 70 strikes, 80, 90. Rose knelt in the kitchen doorway, praying softly. Jesse watched from a distance, his fists clenched, his face etched with helplessness. 100 strikes. Chloe's voice was barely a thread. 100, 101, 102. Randall took a long drink from the tequila bottle he had left next to the post and continued. The whip whistled and cracked with a mechanical rhythm, as if it were a torture machine. 120, 140, 160. Chloe could no longer stand. She hung from the post, held up only by the ropes that bound her wrists. Her knees touched the dusty ground. "Get up!" Randall yelled, kicking her in the back. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't respond. 161. The colonel squeezed the camera so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Hold on, daughter. Hold on a little longer. Dad's going to fix this. I swear to God, I'm going to fix this." 200 strikes. The sun began to set on the horizon. The shadows lengthened in the courtyard. The macabre spectacle continued. 200, 201, 202. Randall began to tire. His arm was weakening. The blows were losing force, but his sick pride wouldn't let him stop. He had said 300, and it would be 300. "Don't stop counting," he growled, taking another drink. 250 strikes. 270. 280. Chloe counted like an automaton, in a voice that no longer seemed human. Her body had given up, but her mind kept working out of pure survival instinct. 290. 291. "The last 10, loud!" Randall shouted, recovering energy from some dark well of wickedness. The colonel kept recording. Every number Chloe pronounced was being recorded on video and audio. Every groan, every ignored plea, every second of that torture. 298. 299. The final strike echoed in the silence of the sunset, like a final thunderclap. 300! The whip fell to the ground. Randall breathed heavily, soaked in sweat and alcohol. He looked at Chloe, who hung unconscious from the post, and spat to the side. "Someone take her down and bring her inside," he ordered the hands who watched in terror from a distance. "And clean that up. I don't want to see any of this tomorrow." He turned and walked into the house, slamming the door. Jesse and Rose ran toward Chloe. They untied her with trembling hands. The young woman's body fell like a dead weight into Jesse's arms. "She's alive," Rose said, touching her neck, searching for a pulse. "But my God, this is no longer human. This is the work of the devil." They carefully carried her to the utility room, where Rose began to clean the wounds while murmuring prayers. The colonel waited until everyone was inside. He turned off the camera. He reviewed the recording. Everything was there. Every strike. Every number. Randall's voice ordering the torture. the image of Chloe tied up and defenseless. He walked out of the shed slowly, as if every step weighed a ton. He approached the post where his daughter had been tied. He picked up a torn piece of her dress that had caught on a splinter. He put it in his pocket along with the camera. His eyes no longer held tears, only ice. The ice of a soldier who had just declared war. That night, while Randall snored drunk in his room, completely oblivious to the hell he had unleashed, Colonel Stephen Miller sat in the tool shed with a satellite phone he had kept hidden. He dialed a number. Someone answered on the other end. "Miller here. I need the complete package. Legal documentation, contacts into the district attorney's office, and I want the best lawyer in Fort Worth. I have proof of systematic torture. Video, audio, witnesses. I want this son of a bitch to spend the rest of his life rotting in a cell." He paused, listening to the response. "No, I'm not going to kill him. Death would be too quick. I want him to suffer every day, to wake up every morning knowing he lost everything. I want the name Randall Blake to be synonymous with coward and abuser for the rest of history." He hung up the phone and opened his notebook. He wrote a single sentence in firm handwriting. "The war has just begun, and I already know how I'm going to win it." Chloe opened her eyes 3 days later, and the first thing she felt was pain. It wasn't ordinary pain. It was as if every inch of her back was on fire. She tried to move, but her body refused. She was lying face down on a thin mattress in the utility room, covered only by a clean sheet. "Don't move, child." Rose's voice came from somewhere in the room. "You're still very bad." "How long?" 3 days. You've been fading in and out of consciousness. I've been treating you as best I can, but you need a doctor." "No." Chloe closed her eyes. "If a doctor comes, Randall will kill him, or he'll kill me for calling him." Rose pressed her lips together. She knew Chloe was right. Outside on the ranch, everything seemed to have returned to normal. Randall woke up every morning with a hangover, shouted orders at the hands, drank from noon, and collapsed drunk every night. When anyone asked about Chloe, he replied with indifference. "She's sick, she'll recover." And no one dared to ask more. But something had changed at Willow Creek. A strange atmosphere hung in the hallways. The employees looked at each other with a mixture of fear and anticipation. There were rumors, whispers. Mr. August, the new worker, was no longer invisible. The first time the colonel spoke to Jesse alone was in the stable, when no one else could hear them. "How much does Randall pay you?" Stephen asked, while pretending to repair a saddle. Jesse looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I'll pay you double if you help me." The hand let out a nervous laugh. "Help you with what? To get myself killed?" Stephen put down the tool and looked him straight in the eye. "To get that girl out of here, and to make sure that animal pays for what he did." Jesse fell silent. His hands trembled. You're not a common worker, are you?" "No, but you don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that if you help me, no one will touch you, and you'll leave this ranch with enough money to start somewhere else, far from here." Jesse looked toward the house, and then back at the colonel. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, just observe, and when the time comes, open the main gate at the exact time I tell you." That same afternoon, the colonel approached Rose in the kitchen. She was peeling potatoes with nervous hands. "How is Mrs. Chloe?" Stephen asked in a low voice. Rose started and looked toward the door. "Better than she was, but she still can't get up." "Does he go to see her?" "No, he doesn't even ask. To him, she's just a broken object that's no longer useful." Stephen clenched his fists. "Rose, I need you to do me a favor." She put the knife down on the table. "Depends on what it is. When the time comes, people will arrive, authorities, and I'm going to need you to testify about everything you've seen here. Would you do it?" Rose looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Do you really think you can put an end to this? I don't think so. I know so. She nodded slowly. Then yes, I'll say everything. I can't take this silence anymore. On the 6th day, Chloe managed to sit up in bed for the first time. The pain was still unbearable, but at least she could move. Rose brought her hot soup and bread. You have to eat, child. You need strength. For what? Chloe's voice was hollow. I have nothing left to fight for. My father probably forgot about me. My family gave me up for dead. And I'm already dead. It's just that my body doesn't know it yet. Rose sat beside her and took her hand. There's someone here. A man. I can't say who, but I think he came for you. Chloe looked at her confused. What? What are you talking about? That new worker, Mr. August. Something about him doesn't add up. He asks questions. He observes everything. And he has a look I've seen before in men who know what they're doing. Do you think Randall sent him to watch me? No, I think it's the opposite. I think someone finally came to help you. Chloe wanted to believe her, but she had already lost the capacity for hope. Meanwhile, in the main house, Randall began to notice strange things. One day, he found his office door ajar when he was sure he had locked it. Another day, one of his rifles appeared to have been moved. Small things. Details that a sober man would have ignored, but for someone paranoid and alcoholic, they became signs. Who went into my office? He shouted one night during dinner, where he ate alone because Chloe was still in the utility room. Rose and Jessie exchanged glances. No one, boss, Jessie replied. We've all been working outside. Someone was here. I know it. I feel it. But there was no proof. Just the feeling that the walls had eyes. One night, Randall heard footsteps in the second-floor hallway. He got out of bed, grabbed his pistol, and went out into the hall. Nothing. Only darkness and silence. But when he returned to his room, the window he had left closed was open. What the hell? He checked the whole house. Nothing was missing. No one was there. But fear began to crawl down his spine like a cold snake. On the 10th day since the beating, the colonel had everything ready. He had bought the loyalty of 3 of the 5 employees. He had recordings. He had photos of Chloe's injuries taken by Rose with a disposable camera. He had written testimonies. And he had a plan. He was just waiting for the exact moment. That night, while Randall drank whiskey in his office, the colonel stood in the darkness of the courtyard looking toward the house. He was no longer Mr. August, the humble worker. He was Colonel Stephen Miller, and he was ready for the final battle. He took out his satellite phone and dialed. It's time. I want everything ready for the day after tomorrow. District Attorney Judge at the Judge and the best investigative journalist you have. This is going to be public. I want everyone in Texas to know what happened here. He hung up and looked toward the illuminated window on the second floor, where Randall was still drinking, oblivious to the storm that was about to fall upon him. Somewhere in the house, a wall clock struck 11 o'clock. The desert wind whistled through the mesquite trees. And in the utility room, Chloe woke up from a nightmare, unaware that her real nightmare was about to end. Because in less than 48 hours, the Willow Creek Ranch would be the scene of something no one would ever forget. Justice was on its way, and it brought with it the full weight of the law and the fury of a father. The banquet was Randall's idea. I'm going to celebrate, he announced that morning with a twisted smile. 15 years since I inherited this ranch. We're going to have a party. Invite the neighboring ranchers, the suppliers, everyone. I want them to see that Randall Blake is still the king of this land. No one dared to mention that the real anniversary had been 6 months ago. Everyone knew that when Randall had an idea, there was no way to contradict him. Rose and the 2 women he hired to help spent all day cooking. Jesse and the hands set up long tables in the main courtyard, hung colored lights between the wooden posts, and cleaned everything until the ranch looked different. Chloe was still locked in the utility room. Randall hadn't even told her there would be a party. To him, she no longer existed. At dusk, the guests arrived, ranchers from Fort Worth and Abilene, merchants from Dallas, some acquaintances from nearby towns. Everyone arrived with bottles of tequila, new hats, and fake smiles. They knew who Randall was. They knew it was better to be on his side than against him. The music started playing at 7. A northern group played corridos and rancheras, while the men drank and the women talked in small groups. Randall was in his element, shouting, laughing, telling exaggerated stories about his ranch and his fortune. "This is the life," he shouted, raising his glass, "to Willow Creek and to everyone who knows how to respect a real man." The guests raised their glasses and toasted, although some did so without much enthusiasm. Mr. August served drinks and collected empty plates. No one paid attention to him. He was just another invisible worker, but his eyes observed everything, every corner, every person, every detail. At 9 o'clock at night, when the party was at its highest point, the colonel discreetly approached Jesse. "All set?" Jesse nodded nervously. "The gate is unlocked, as you asked, and Rose has Mrs. Chloe ready." "The cables?" "Cut where you told me, waiting for the signal." "Good. At 9:30, not a minute before or after." Jesse swallowed and walked away. Randall was drunk, surrounded by men who laughed at his bad jokes and applauded his made-up stories. At one point, one of the guests asked, "And your wife, Randall?" "I haven't seen her." Randall's smile hardened for a second. "She's sick. Nothing important." "Too bad. I would have liked to say hello." "There'll be time," Randall replied, taking another long drink. The colored lights flickered cheerfully. The music kept playing. No one noticed when Mr. August disappeared into the shadows. At 9:28, the colonel was in position behind the ranch's electric generator. He took out his phone and sent a short message. "Now." 30 seconds later, all the lights on the ranch flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The music stopped. The courtyard was plunged into total darkness. Only the moon vaguely illuminated the confused silhouettes of the guests. "What happened?" someone shouted. "Relax." Randall's voice tried to sound firm, but the alcohol slurred his tongue. "It's just the generator. Jesse, go check it." But Jesse didn't go anywhere. He was standing next to Rose at the kitchen entrance, waiting. Footsteps were heard in the darkness, many footsteps. Firm, coordinated steps coming from the main gate. "Who's there?" Randall pulled out his pistol. "Identify yourselves." A deep voice echoed in the darkness, a voice that Randall did not recognize, but that made everyone freeze. "Randall Blake, stay where you are." "Who the hell are you?" There was no answer, just more footsteps approaching. Suddenly, Randall felt something cold and metallic against his back. "Drop the weapon," the voice ordered. Randall, confused and drunk, dropped the pistol. Before he could react, he felt his arms being pulled back, and metal handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. "What are you doing? Let me go! This is my property!" He was dragged across the courtyard in complete darkness. The guests listened, but couldn't see anything. Just Randall's voice shouting insults and threats. They took him to the very post where he had beaten Chloe. They pushed him against the wood and tied his hands above his head with the same rope he had used on his wife. "You're dead. You're all dead when I get out of here." Then, as suddenly as they went out, the lights came back on. The courtyard was suddenly illuminated, and all the guests could see the scene. Randall Blake, the party host, tied to the post like an animal, and in front of him, standing in an impeccable military uniform, was a 62-year-old man with a weathered face and eyes as cold as ice. Colonel Stephen Miller. The guests gasped. Some recognized the uniform. Others recognized the face that had been in the newspapers years ago. Everyone understood that something very serious was happening. Who are you?" Randall stammered, his eyes wide. "I am the father of the woman you beat 300 times on this very post." The silence was absolute. Not even the wind dared to blow. Randall tried to process the words. His alcohol-soaked brain took a few seconds to connect the dots. "No, it can't be. I am Colonel Stephen Miller, and I have been here for the past 12 days, observing your every move, recording every abuse, documenting every crime." 5 more men appeared behind the colonel. 2 were wearing uniforms from the Texas Rangers Division. The other 3 were clearly retired military men, the colonel's comrades, who had come to help. This is trespassing." Randall tried to sound threatening, but his voice trembled. "You have no right." "We have all the necessary authorizations," interrupted one of the Rangers, showing documents. "Search warrant, arrest warrant, and judicial order. You have been reported for torture, systematic domestic violence, and unlawful confinement." The colonel took a step forward. In his hands he carried a thick folder. "Do you know what's in here, Randall? Video of the 300 lashings, full audio, photographs of the injuries, signed testimonies from 3 of your employees, medical records. Everything a judge needs to lock you up for the rest of your miserable life." Randall looked around for help, but the guests just watched him with a mixture of horror and fascination. Some were already backing toward their trucks. "You? You saw how she disobeyed me? I had the right to correct her." And the colonel got so close that Randall could see the contained fury in his eyes. "No man has the right to destroy a woman, and especially not my daughter." He took a photograph out of the folder and held it up to Randall's face. It was Chloe, lying face down, with the wounds still fresh. "This is what you did. Look closely." Randall looked away. "Look at it!" The colonel's shout made everyone present flinch. At that moment, from the door of the house, Rose appeared, helping Chloe walk. The young woman was weak, leaning on the cook, but she was standing. Some of the guests gasped when they saw her emaciated face and the careful way she moved. Chloe looked up and saw her father. Her eyes filled with tears. "Dad?" The colonel turned, and at that moment, the cold and calculating military man disappeared. Only a father remained, running toward his daughter with tears in his eyes. He hugged her carefully, aware of her injuries, and Chloe collapsed in his arms, sobbing. "Forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for not listening to you. Forgive me for—" "Shh. It's over. It's over, my child. Dad is here, and he will never touch you again." Randall, still tied to the post, started shouting. "This is illegal. You can't do this to me. I have rights." The colonel separated from Chloe and walked slowly toward Randall. He took the same whip he had used against his daughter from his belt. He held it up for everyone to see. "Do you know how many strikes I would give you if justice worked with an eye for an eye? 300. But I'm not like you. I'm not a coward who hits someone who can't defend themselves." He dropped the whip at Randall's feet. "I'm going to give you something much worse than physical pain. I'm going to give you justice. You're going to go to trial. You're going to be publicly exposed. Every newspaper, every newscast will talk about you. And when they lock you up, you're going to wake up every day knowing you lost everything for being a monster." The ranger men approached and began reading the charges aloud in front of all the guests. "Randall Blake, you are hereby detained for the crimes of aggravated family violence, torture, and serious felonious assault." But Randall was no longer listening. He looked at Chloe, who was hugging her father, and for the first time in his life, he understood that he had lost, and that this time there was no escape. 3 Texas Rangers trucks entered the ranch with their lights flashing, illuminating the night with red and blue flashes. The guests who were still at the party moved aside, as if the trucks were going to run them over. Some had already run to their vehicles. Others remained paralyzed, unsure if staying was complicity or leaving was admitting cowardice. From the first vehicle stepped out a woman in her 40s, wearing a gray business suit and a badge hanging from her neck. It was Agent Patricia Vance, a special prosecutor for gender violence from the district attorney's office in Dallas. Behind her got out 4 armed ministerial agents and 2 forensic experts. Patricia walked straight toward Colonel Miller. They greeted each other with a firm handshake. "Colonel, everything is in order. We have the search warrant signed by the judge and the arrest warrant. Are you ready?" "More than ready, Agent." Patricia looked toward the post where Randall was still tied up, sweating and stammering incoherent threats. "Is that the subject?" "That's him." She nodded and approached with firm steps. One of the agents followed her with an official video camera, recording everything for the judicial file. "Randall Blake," Patricia said in a clear and professional voice. "I am Agent Patricia Vance of the District Attorney's Office. You are formally detained on charges of aggravated family violence amounting to torture, felonious assault that endangers life, and unlawful confinement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." "This is a trap," Randall shouted. "That crazy old man trespassed on my property. He's the criminal here." Patricia didn't even blink. "Colonel Miller entered this property under a covert identity after filing a formal complaint with this office 14 days ago. Everything he did was with judicial authorization. You, on the other hand, have 3 previous domestic violence complaints filed and dismissed due to lack of follow-up, 2 labor lawsuits from workers who claim to have been assaulted, and now we have video of you systematically torturing your wife. Do you want to continue speaking, or would you prefer to wait for your lawyer?" Randall opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, he had no answer. One of the agents untied him from the post and adjusted his handcuffs. Randall tried to resist, pushing with his shoulder, but the agent easily controlled him and forced him to walk toward the truck. "You can't take me. This is my ranch. I'm somebody here." The employees watched in silence. Jesse had his arms crossed and a small smile he tried to hide. Rose cried with relief. The young hands, Mike and Darren, looked at each other, unable to believe what they were seeing. As they put Randall into the truck, he managed to see Chloe standing next to her father. He tried to shout something at her, but the words caught in his throat when he saw her look. There was no fear. There was no submission. There was only emptiness, as if he no longer existed. "Take him away," Patricia ordered. The truck started with Randall inside, still shouting threats that no one heard. The silence that remained afterward was almost religious. Patricia approached the colonel and Chloe. "Mrs. Miller, I'm going to need you to come with me to give a formal statement and for a forensic doctor to examine and document your injuries. Do you feel strong enough?" Chloe looked at her father. He nodded tenderly. "I'm with you all the way, daughter." "Then yes," Chloe replied in a weak but firm voice. "I'm ready." While Patricia coordinated with the forensic experts to document the scene, one of the agents called the colonel aside. "Mr. Miller, we found something in the detainee's office that you should see." They went up to the second floor. The door to Randall's office had been forced open by the agents. Inside, the walls were covered with rifles, hunting trophies, and photographs of Randall posing with local politicians and businessmen. The agent opened a desk drawer and pulled out a red folder. "Look at this." Inside were photographs. Dozens of photographs of women. Some were of Chloe in everyday moments. Cooking, cleaning, sleeping. But there were other women too, faces the colonel didn't recognize. And next to each photo, there were handwritten dates. "What is this?" Stephen asked with a churning stomach. We believe they are ex-partners or women he had relationships with. Some of these photos are from 10 years ago. We're going to investigate every case. The colonel closed the folder and handed it to the agent. Make sure this gets into the file. This guy is worse than I thought. They went back down to the courtyard, where the forensic experts were already taking photographs of the post, the whip lying on the ground, and the marks in the dirt. Everything would be evidence. One of the guests who still remained on the ranch, an older rancher named Mr. Farmer, approached the colonel with his hat in his hand. Colonel Miller, we didn't know. Well, we suspected, but we never imagined it was so serious. Stephen looked at him coldly. And what would you have done if you had known? Call the police? Or continue coming to his parties and pretend everything was fine? Mr. Farmer lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry. Don't tell me. Tell my daughter. And all the women who suffer in silence while men like you look the other way. The rancher walked away without saying more. At 11 o'clock at night, when they had finished collecting evidence, Patricia approached the colonel. We have enough to sink him. The video of the torture is devastating. The testimonies of Rose, Jesse, and the other employees are conclusive, and the photographs of your daughter's injuries speak for themselves. This case is going to be high profile, Colonel. The newspapers are going to want to talk to you. Let them talk all they want. I want the world to know what kind of monster Randall Blake was. Patricia nodded. There's something else. The ranch, legally, is still marital property. Your daughter is entitled to half of all of this. I don't want anything from here, interrupted Chloe, who had heard the conversation. I don't want a penny from this cursed place. The colonel put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. It's not about what you want, honey. It's about justice. That man used this ranch as his private prison. Now, this place is going to serve you. You'll sell it. You'll rent it. You'll do whatever you want. But you're not going to leave him with anything. Patricia took some documents from her briefcase. We are going to request a preventive embargo from the judge on all assets while the process lasts. And we are going to ask for a permanent restraining order. Randall Blake will not be able to approach you ever again, Mrs. Miller. You have my word. Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Relief. A relief so profound that her legs trembled. Her father held her before she fell. It's over, daughter. It's over. The rangers' trucks began to leave. The last guests had left a while ago. The Willow Creek Ranch was silent, illuminated only by the lights that still hung from the interrupted party. Rose approached Chloe and hugged her with tears in her eyes. Thank God, child. Thank God your dad arrived. Jesse and the other hands also approached, one by one, to say goodbye. Everyone knew that this was the last night they would spend at Willow Creek. What's going to happen to us? Asked Mike, the youngest hand. The colonel took an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Jesse. There's enough here for everyone to collect what they're owed, and a little more. Consider it a bonus for your bravery in testifying. Look for work elsewhere, far from here, and if anyone asks, tell the truth. You have nothing to hide. Jesse opened the envelope and saw the bills. His eyes filled with tears. You're a man of honor, Colonel. I'm just a father who did what he had to do. Half an hour later, the colonel helped Chloe into his truck. She looked back one last time at the ranch where she had suffered so much. The colored lights were still hanging, swaying in the wind. The tables were still full of half-eaten plates. Everything seemed frozen in time. Ready to go home? Her father asked. Chloe nodded. More than ready. As the truck drove down the dirt road toward the highway, Chloe saw in the rearview mirror how Willow Creek grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the darkness. And for the first time in 18 months, she took a deep breath without feeling fear, because she knew that the man who had destroyed her was now locked in a cell, facing exactly what she had faced, the feeling of having no escape, of being trapped, of knowing that life as she knew it had ended. only for Randall Blake, this was just beginning. The Miller house in the River Oaks neighborhood of Houston had all the lights on when they arrived at 3 in the morning. Chloe got out of the truck slowly, still sore. She looked at the gray stone facade, the garden her mother cared for so lovingly, the window of her old room on the second floor. Everything was exactly the same, as if time had not passed, as if she had not been dead for 18 months. The front door opened before they reached the entrance. Martha Miller appeared in the doorway in a cotton robe, her face marked by months of crying and sleepless nights. When she saw her daughter, she put her hands over her mouth and let out a scream that came from the depths of her soul. "Chloe!" She ran barefoot across the stone path and hugged her daughter so hard that Chloe had to stifle a cry of pain, but she didn't pull away. After everything that had happened, that pain was welcome. It was the pain of love, not of violence. "My child, my child, my child," Martha repeated like a prayer as she kissed her daughter's face over and over. "I thought I had lost you. I thought I would never see you again." "I'm here, Mom. I'm here." And behind Martha appeared Chloe's 2 sisters, Danielle, 27, and Sophia, 20. Both ran toward her crying, hugging all 3 of them in a closed circle of arms and tears, while Martha wrapped her arms around all of them from behind. "It can't be real," Danielle sobbed. "I looked everywhere for you. I called all the hospitals, the police, everyone." "I'm sorry," Chloe whispered. "I'm sorry for disappearing like that." "You don't have to apologize for anything," said Sophia, the youngest, wiping her tears. "The important thing is that you're back." The colonel watched the scene from a few steps back, his arms crossed, and a small smile that tried to hide his own tears. A man can survive a war. He can face bullets and ambushes, but nothing prepares him to see his whole family together again. More people appeared from the doorway. Chloe's aunts and uncles, who lived in the same city and had come as soon as Stephen told them, her cousins and 3 small children, Danielle's children, who watched with curiosity the thin, fragile woman everyone was hugging and kissing. "Who is she?" asked the youngest, a 5-year-old girl, pulling on her grandmother's robe. "She's your Aunt Chloe, my love," Martha replied in a shaky voice. "The one I told you about in the photos, the one we thought was very far away. She's not leaving anymore." Martha looked into her daughter's eyes and squeezed her hand. "No, my darling, she's never leaving again." They all went into the house. The smell of freshly baked bread came from the kitchen. Aunt Lucy had spent all night preparing food for when Chloe arrived. Tamales, sweet bread, hot chocolate, handmade tortillas. The dining room table was full of dishes, as if it were Christmas. "You have to eat, my child," Aunt Lucy said, hugging her. "You're all skin and bones." In the living room, someone had put on music, nothing loud, just soft guitar songs that filled the space with warmth. The women sat around Chloe, each wanting to touch her, to confirm that it was real. The men stayed in the kitchen with the colonel, pouring coffee and talking in low voices. "Did they really catch him?" asked Robert, Stephen's brother-in-law. "He's in a cell in Dallas County Jail, and he won't get out for many years. And how is Chloe really?" The colonel looked toward the living room where his daughter was surrounded by love. "Physically, she will heal. The wounds will scar. But what they did to her inside, that will take time. A lot of time." Robert nodded gravely. "Do you need anything? Help with lawyers? With money?" "I have everything covered. But thank you, my friend." In the living room, Chloe was sitting on the big sofa with her nephews and nieces, curiously exploring around her. The oldest, an 8-year-old boy, asked her, "Auntie, is it true that you left with a bad cowboy?" Danielle immediately scolded him. "Matthew, don't ask those questions." But Chloe smiled sadly and stroked the boy's hair. "Yes, Matthew, I left with someone I thought was good, but he turned out to be very bad. That's why you always have to listen to your parents and your grandparents when they tell you someone is not right for you. Okay? The boy nodded very seriously. Okay. And if someone hurts you, I'll tell Grandpa so he can put them in jail? Everyone laughed, and Chloe hugged him. Exactly. Martha brought a cup of hot chocolate and sat next to her daughter. Do you want to talk about what happened? Chloe shook her head. Not yet, Mom. I just want to be here, to feel like I'm home, that I'm safe. You are safe, my love. No one will touch you here. Never again. They spent the rest of the early morning like this, as a family, telling old stories, laughing at memories, carefully avoiding the topic of the ranch and Randall. There would be time for the difficult questions. Tonight was just to celebrate that Chloe was back. At 5 in the morning, when the sky began to lighten, Sophia accompanied Chloe to her old room. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The curtains with flowers that she had chosen herself, the books on the shelf, the photographs on the wall from when she was a teenager. Mom didn't let anyone touch anything, Sophia said. She said that when you came back, everything had to be waiting for you. Chloe sat on the bed and ran her hand over the knitted quilt. I never thought I would see this room again. Well, you're here, and you're going to stay as long as you need to, or forever if you want. Sophia hugged her again and left, closing the door softly. Chloe was left alone for the first time since she left the ranch. She went to the window and looked out at the garden, illuminated by the first lights of dawn. The trees she helped plant as a child were now large. Her mother's roses bloomed in bright colors. Everything was life here. Everything was hope. She looked at herself in the dressing table mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who left 18 months ago. Thinner, paler, with tired eyes and a wounded soul. But she was alive, and she was free. She changed slowly, putting on one of her old pajamas that was still stored in the drawer. She lay down in bed, and for the first time in more than a year, closed her eyes without fear, without hearing threatening footsteps, without waiting for the next blow. Only silence and peace. Downstairs, in the living room, the Colonel was still sitting with a coffee in his hand. Martha sat next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You brought her back. I almost didn't make it in time, he replied in a hoarse voice. If I had waited one more day. But you didn't wait. You saved her, as I always knew you would. He hugged her in silence, letting the tears he had held back for 12 days finally come out. Somewhere in Dallas, 125 miles away, Randall Blake woke up in a 10 by 10 foot cell, with concrete walls and a thin mattress that smelled of dampness. The hangover was splitting his head. The orange inmate uniform was too big for him, and for the first time in his life, there was no one to yell at, no one to hit, no one to control. There was only silence, iron bars, and the certainty that his life as he knew it had ended. Meanwhile, in Houston, in a house full of love and light, Chloe Miller slept soundly, knowing that when she woke up, her father would be there, and that this time, no one could ever hurt her again. But the story wasn't over yet, because in 2 days, a judge would issue a sentence that would change everything, and Randall Blake was going to discover that losing his freedom was only the beginning of his punishment. The judge's gavel struck the table with a dry sound that echoed throughout the room. The session has begun. The Fort Worth Criminal Court was full. Journalists in the back rows, activists from women's organizations, curious people who had read the story in the newspapers. And in the front row, Colonel Stephen Miller, sitting next to his daughter Chloe, both formally dressed, both with straight backs and their gaze fixed forward. On the other side of the room, Randall Blake was sitting next to his defense attorney, a man in a cheap suit who had taken the case because no one else wanted to. Randall no longer looked like the arrogant rancher of 2 weeks ago. He had an unkempt beard, deep dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were handcuffed on the table. Judge Robert Hughes, a 60-year-old man with a reputation for being tough but fair, opened the file. Case number 42. The State versus Randall Blake. The charges are aggravated family violence amounting to torture, felonious assault that endangered life, and unlawful confinement. The defense attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We argue that there was provocation on the part of the victim, and that— Sit down, the judge interrupted in a firm voice. I have reviewed all the evidence presented by the prosecution. Complete video of the assault. Audio where the accused is clearly heard, ordering 300 strikes. Photographs of the injuries. Testimonies from 3 eyewitnesses. And a forensic medical report indicating that the wounds were consistent with systematic torture. There is no provocation that justifies what this man did. Randall tried to stand up, but his lawyer pulled his arm. She betrayed me. She wanted to write to her family so that— Silence! The judge's shout made everyone in the room stand still. You do not have the right to speak unless I tell you to, and I suggest you learn to keep your mouth shut if you don't want me to add contempt of court to the list of charges. Randall sat back down, breathing heavily. The judge continued. In addition to the evidence of torture, the prosecution presented evidence of a pattern of violent behavior dating back years. Photographs of multiple women found at his home, filed complaints from former employees, and testimonies from neighbors confirming screams and blows regularly heard at the ranch known as Willow Creek. Patricia Vance, the prosecutor, stood up. Your Honor, the district attorney's office requests the maximum sentence allowed by law. This is not a case of common domestic violence. It is a case of premeditated torture, executed with malice and documented on video. The accused showed zero remorse. In fact, during his arrest, he attempted to bribe the ministerial agents and threatened to make everyone involved pay. The judge nodded and wrote something in his notes. I have made my decision. Randall Blake, stand up. Randall stood up, trembling. His lawyer held his arm. For the crimes of aggravated family violence amounting to torture, serious felonious assault, and unlawful confinement, this court finds you guilty on all counts. I sentence you to 22 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you must pay $200,000 in restitution to the victim for physical and psychological damages. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Some of the activists applauded until the judge hit the gavel, calling for order. But that is not all, the judge continued. In accordance with the Texas Family Code, and considering that the marriage has not yet been legally dissolved, Mrs. Chloe Miller Blake is entitled to half of all marital property acquired during the marriage. This includes the ranch, Willow Creek, the livestock, the vehicles, the bank accounts, and any other property in Mr. Blake's name. Randall slumped in his chair. No, you can't take everything from me. Yes, we can, the judge replied dryly, and we will. Furthermore, a permanent restraining order is issued. You will not be able to approach Mrs. Chloe Miller within 500 yards for the rest of your life. If you violate this order, an additional 5 years will be added to your sentence. Is that clear? Randall did not answer. He was slumped in his chair, staring into space. Take him away, the judge ordered the bailiffs. 2 officers lifted Randall by the arms and took him out of the courtroom. He tried to look back, toward Chloe, but she didn't even turn around. She was looking straight ahead, with silent tears running down her cheeks. Tears of relief. When the doors closed behind Randall, the judge looked at Chloe. Mrs. Miller, this court offers its apologies for not having acted sooner when you filed previous complaints that were dismissed. The system failed, and I hope this sentence is a small step to repair that damage. Chloe nodded without being able to speak. Her father squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Your Honor," the colonel said. Outside the courthouse, journalists were waiting. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted from all sides. "Mrs. Miller, how do you feel about the sentence? Colonel Miller, is it true that you infiltrated the ranch for almost 2 weeks? Are you going to sue the state for negligence in the previous complaints?" Patricia Vance stood in front of the microphones. "The Miller family will not be making statements today. What I can tell you is that this sentence sets an important precedent. Gender violence will not be tolerated in this state, and abusers will pay with the full weight of the law." The colonel and Chloe got into the truck and drove away, while the camera flashes illuminated the windows. 3 weeks later, Chloe signed the divorce documents and the papers for the division of assets. The Willow Creek Ranch was put up for sale. The buyers were a young couple from Austin who planned to convert it into a spiritual retreat center. Chloe used the money from the sale and the bank accounts for something no one expected. She opened a foundation. It was called Women of Willow Creek and was dedicated to helping women victims of domestic violence. It provided temporary shelter, free legal advice, psychological support, and job training programs so they could rebuild their lives. The first shelter opened in Dallas. It was a large house with a garden, comfortable rooms, and a team of professionals available 24 hours a day. At the entrance, there was a bronze plaque that read, "Here, all women are safe." In the first 3 months, they helped 42 women escape abusive situations. They gave them a home, helped them obtain restraining orders, paid for lawyers, and gave them the tools to start over. Rose, the former ranch cook, became the shelter's administrator. Jesse got a job at a security company where he used his experience to train guards. The other employees found new jobs away from that cursed place. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the trial, Chloe was sitting in her parents' garden drinking iced tea. She had gained 20 pounds, color had returned to her cheeks, and although she still had occasional nightmares, every day was a little better than the last. The colonel came out of the house and sat beside her. "How do you feel, daughter?" "Better, a little better every day." He smiled. "Patricia told me that your foundation already received a large donation from a company in Houston, and that the state government wants to replicate the model in other cities. Yes, I never thought anything good could come out of all this. But if my story can help other women not go through the same thing, then it was worth it." The colonel looked at her with pride. "You are stronger than you think, Chloe." She shook her head. "No, Dad. You were the strong one. I just survived. Surviving when everything tells you to give up is the greatest strength there is." They remained silent for a moment, listening to the birds singing and the sound of the wind in the trees. "Dad, do you ever regret not killing him? You had the gun. You had the chance." The colonel took a deep breath. "Every day I wonder if I should have done it. But then I remember that if I had killed him, I would be in prison, and you would still feel guilty, as if it were somehow your fault. So, no, I don't regret it. Justice was sweeter than revenge." Chloe leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I would never give up on you. You are my daughter." The sun began to set on the horizon, staining the sky with oranges and pinks. The colonel stood up and offered his hand to Chloe. "Shall we walk a little?" She accepted his hand, and they walked together through the garden. They passed by Martha's rose bushes, by the tree Chloe climbed as a child, by the small fountain where they used to throw coins and make wishes. When they reached the end of the garden, where there was an iron bench facing the mountains, they sat down side by side. The colonel spoke in a soft but firm voice. "You know, daughter, during those 12 days on the ranch, there were moments when I wanted to forget the plan. I wanted to take out my pistol and end everything. But something stopped me. A voice inside me that said, 'Be patient. God has his own time.' And was that voice right? Yes, because if I had acted in anger, I would have lost. But I acted with wisdom, and we won." Chloe looked toward the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking. Do you think God will forgive me for disobeying, for leaving with Randall when you warned me not to? The colonel hugged her. God has nothing to forgive you for, Chloe. You are the victim. The only one who needs forgiveness is him. And frankly, I don't know if he deserves it. But you always taught me that we must forgive, and I taught you well. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean allowing the abuser to go unpunished. It means letting go of the hatred that poisons you inside. And that, daughter, only you can decide when and how to do it. They stayed sitting while the sun finished setting behind the mountains. The lights of the city began to turn on one by one, like earthly stars. The colonel put his arm around Chloe's shoulders and pulled her close to him. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Absolute security. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes? What happens to someone like Randall? Someone who did so much harm? Is there redemption for people like that?" The colonel looked up at the sky that was slowly darkening. The justice of a father is harsh, but the forgiveness of God is eternal. Chloe opened her eyes and looked at him. "What do you mean?" "That I did what I had to do as your father. I punished him with everything the law allows. But God's forgiveness, that's not for me to decide. If that man ever truly repents, if he changes, if he asks for forgiveness, then maybe he will find peace. But that is an account between him and his Creator, not between him and us." Chloe nodded slowly. "I think I understand. We already did our part, daughter. We gave him earthly justice. The rest is not in our hands." They got up from the bench when night had completely fallen. They walked back toward the house, where the warm lights shone through the windows, and they could hear the voices of the family gathered for dinner. As they walked, Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that the future could be different. That the pain wouldn't last forever. That she could be more than her scars. "Ready to go in?" her father asked. When they reached the door, "Ready." And together they walked into the house full of light, leaving behind the shadows of the past, walking toward a future where Chloe Miller was no longer a victim, but a survivor. A woman who had walked through hell and come out the other side. Not unharmed, but alive. Not without scars, but with dignity. And in the end, that was all that mattered. We want to get to know you. Write your city and country in the comments. What did you think of this story? What part impacted you the most? If this story kept you hooked until the end, you're going to love the next one until the next story.